middleweight roller coaster of bookings and rebookings comes up this weekend, and it gives us this fight between Fluffy Hernandez, Alexander Hernandez, taking on Pittsburgh's own, by then way of Colorado, Josh Fremd. And if you look at this fight for Fremd making his UFC debut, it's a big time opportunity. Obviously, he was involved not that long ago in the middleweight 4-man tournament for that LFA middleweight belt. He ends up getting the win over Bruno Oliveira, who was not that far removed from his fight against Carlos Ulberg on Dana White's Contender Series. He drops him fairly easily. It's kind of an odd punch that drops Oliveira. Almost looked like a jab, really, was what it was. It drops Oliveira. Fremd able to get the win. Then he goes out there and he takes on Gregory Rodriguez, and he does not win that fight. He gets blitzed, and it really was a bad timeout. So for Fremd, he gets the opportunity. He comes back. He has a couple of more fights. He was featured on Dana White's Looking for a Fight in his last time out and really put on some very, very good performances. And I want to make sure that I give them the credit that they deserve. He's able to beat Renato Valente over with LFA. He gets the win over Joel Bowman his last time out in that fight. On Looking for a Fight, Bowman fought a terrible, terrible fight. I want to say that one right out the gate. I mean, Bowman went out there swinging for the absolute fences. He was really trying to hit home runs, and that was pretty much it. He had the skinniest chicken legs I've ever seen, and I say that being a person
own a mirror, Craig,
that has skinny chicken legs. So I'm not necessarily making fun of him as I am myself, but when I went and I watched that fight, it really was. Bowman just went out there from the start, whiffing the hardest shots he could, trying to put Josh Fremd out. Because we've seen Fremd, even in the Valente fight, get cracked and get wobbled a little bit. So he gets wobbled a little bit against Valente. He's able to get the win there. Against Bowman, he ends up getting the win. And if you go and you watch that fight, the sneakiest thing about Josh Fremd that I noticed, he is a meat and potatoes type of fighter. He fights with the very, very specific, very, very technical game plans, and you see him implement them. Once he's able to figure out distance with his jab, it's over. He's just going to spam you with that jab. He makes the fight relatively boring, but he also has a little bit of snap on that, a little bit of snap on his right hand when he decides to throw it. He throws some leg kicks just to switch things up. But the craziest part about it for Josh Fremd, he spent a little bit of time wrestling in D3, and that's interesting because when he decides in most fights, and I wouldn't say in this fight, but when he decides
Don't do it, Josh.
He wants to wrestle and he wants to get that top control, it just adds that extra layer of depth to the game plan of Josh Fremd.
I 100% agree. And in his last loss, too, which you had brought up, I'd much rather a guy loses to Gregory Rodriguez, someone who we all know, than just lose to someone on the regional scene that we never heard of in the first place. It was bad, though. I know it was bad, but again, we're talking about a good fighter who beat him. We're not talking about someone who's 0-1 who knocked him out really bad. So I would much rather him lose to a recognizable name, although it was bad, than, again, lose to someone who's just like a career regional fighter. For Fremd, it will be really interesting because I do think he's the better striker. And like you said, when he is able to find his jab and his range, he really does open up the totality of his game. But he's someone who is getting hit clean quite a bit in every single one of his fights. And I almost bring up like Dillian Whyte. Like Dillian Whyte's a really, really good boxer and he's going to fight Tyson Fury for the title. But in every Dillian Whyte fight, there's that one moment that you think he's going to get flatlined. And sometimes he does get flatlined. But he's always hurt at least at some point throughout his fight. I'm curious to see when Fremd does start fighting better strikers in this division because, let's be honest, Anthony Hernandez isn't the type of guy who's going to be able to exploit every hole in your striking defense. He can strike on the feet for sure, but he's not someone who you will look at who's progressively learning throughout their fight, finding holes as they go. I don't think he's going to have a lot of success on the feet, at least early on in this fight. I think it's going to be interesting once Josh finds his range and sort of settles into the fight, because that's when I think he's more susceptible to getting hit himself. Because when he does start to settle into the fight, it's sort of robotic. And that's the thing that I always go back to with Fremd and his striking style. It is very... It's just sort of similar across the board no matter what time the fight's at. So it's going to be very interesting if he starts out having success. Because I think if he starts out having success, we can sort of expect the fight to maintain the similar flow throughout it. But I think that if Hernandez is able to get a takedown at any point throughout this fight, he is that good of a grappler. And I think he's been able to show that throughout his UFC tenure to where you do not want to mess around with with Anthony Hernandez on the mat. I'm just really curious to see how is Hernandez going to get Fremd's respect on the feet, especially early.
A little bit of an overreaction. I don't know. I mean, you look at it, when Hernandez is taking on a poor grappler, he's able to get the wins. Now, again, Rodolfo Vieira is different because
I just wouldn't mess with it, though.
Rodolfo had a ton of success in the first round. In the second round, fell off a cliff cardio-wise. And the thing that makes that win even more sweeter is the fact that Hernandez broke his right hand at the start of that fight, kept throwing it, and beats Adolfo Vieira, the black belt hunter, submits him for the first time in MMA with a broken hand. So if you look at it for Hernandez, I talked about bookings and rebookings. There was a fight that was supposed to happen with Duraev this weekend. That one fell out. He's supposed to take on Dricus Du Plessis, a ranked opponent. That one fell out. Du Plessis was supposed to Kelvin Gastelum. I am compromised, so that fight's not going to happen. But you go from those guys, and I consider Duraev like on the cusp, and he's only had one UFC fight where he himself did get cracked. But Albert Duraev is a mother effer. And Josh Fremd's not Duraev in the aggressiveness and the way that they fight. Josh Fremd, again, like I said, a little meat and potatoes, but it really does get the job done. Before that, though, Hernandez was supposed to take on Dustin Stoisfus back in December, and he was supposed to take on Puna Soriano back in June of last year. The hand was still an issue, so that fight didn't take place. So Hernandez has been on the shelf since that Vieira fight for just over a year. But again, if you look at it from Dana White's Contender Series 5 fights ago to now, fights Jordan Wright, and he does what you need to do to beat Jordan Wright. Crashes distance, throws power shots, drops them, finishes them. Disgusting knockout where Wright's head's there, and then he keeps punching it. It was really, really bad. Then he comes into the UFC, and he loses to Marcus Perez, where Perez takes him down, and Perez submits him with an anaconda choke. He goes out there and fights Jun Young Park. I love a Jun Young Park fight. Beats him by submission. Loses to Kevin Holland, where, again, that fight was kind of in Hernandez range, in tight. Holland was able to get the clinch, throw the knee up the middle. Hernandez drops. He loses his wind. He gets beat in that fight. And that was kind of near the start of the Kevin Holland 2020 Here We Go train. And then Hernandez, again, gets that win his last time out. So, Matt, again, I look at this one for Hernandez, a main training partner of Max Griffin. He's a black belt in the Marinoble MMA style. Whatever the F that means. Like, I don't know if that's like Bok Fu. That's, Max Griffin's black belt. But it is kind of weird that way. Hanging out with Griffin and Jamal Emmers over on the Instagram. And when I look at this one, again, for both of these guys, a lot of experience, if you will. For Hernandez, 9-1 as an amateur, 8-2 with a no contest due to the weed against Jordan Wright, but for all intents and purposes, a giant knockout win. So, Matt, when we look at this fight, Hernandez open to minus 150 favorite. He's minus 185 right now. For Josh Fremd on best fight odds, open plus 130. He is a plus 155. If we have a look at the Tapology vote, surprise to us as they are to you, I'm going to say over under 70% Anthony Hernandez. See how hard it is?
It is. It's very difficult. I'll say slightly over.
I'm going to say slightly over. Ooh, it's slightly under. 1,212 total votes. 74% Hernandez, 30% by decision, 51% by submission, 12% by knockout. Really wish we got that Puna Soriano fight now that we're talking about it. For the 26% that have Fremd, 30% by decision, 55% by knockout. Josh Fremd is a very good fighter. I think if he wins this fight, it'll be by decision, not by knockout, which deviates away from what the fans have said. Again, I look at it. He does have power. He does have zest and pop at the end of his shots. When you crowd distance, he gets hit and he drops his right hand a lot. I talked about that with the Piera Rodriguez fight taking on Kay Hansen. But Josh Fremd is very susceptible. He can make the changes in his fights, but he does drop his right hand a lot. And he takes these long periods between his strikes on his resets. Anthony Hernandez is a fast twitch guy with a lot of power. So on the feet, I give Fremd the advantage. Again, in technical striking and power, I give it to Hernandez. And when it comes to the grappling, wrestling, probably close. I might even give Fremd the edge. But when it comes to overall grappling, Anthony Hernandez with the submission ability, his black belt in Marinoble's martial arts.
I just couldn't imagine Josh Fremd's coach right before this fight being like, hey.
Being Mark Montoya.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine Mark Montoya, who's an extremely smart head coach, being like, you know what we should do against Anthony Hernandez? We should probably shoot a double like 5 seconds into it. I don't expect him to wrestle very much against Hernandez just because the submission threat of Hernandez, especially with his defensive submissions on the back foot. It will be interesting because I think Hernandez is more likely to win by knockout early and submission later, just because that's sort of the style of his fight. If it does become more of a grindier fight, he can fall back on his grappling prowess, and then we realize just how good of a submission threat he is. With Fremd, I think he is going to have a lot of success, at least early on, with his distance management in this fight. I think the first 2 minutes, first 3 minutes, we're going to be sweating, and we're going to be really nervous about Hernandez, but I do think that every minute that goes by, Hernandez is going to be able to get a little bit closer, and a little bit closer, and a little bit closer. And that's not only going to help him with his striking ability, that's going to help him with his own takedowns if he does decide to go for them. So for me, I do slightly side Hernandez, but this is a weird fight because Hernandez has some very key strengths. He also has some weaknesses in his game too that someone who is well-rounded like Fremd could take advantage of. So I think this is a very fun fight, but I am ever so slightly favoring Fluffy.
Big time opportunity for Josh Fremd coming in on short notice to get the win. He wasn't able to get that LFA middleweight title against Gregory Rodriguez. Anthony Hernandez, the real McCoy. He got that win over Brendan Allen, and then he was able to punch his ticket to Dana White's Contender Series. So a big-time opportunity for both of these guys. For both of these guys, we're going with Anthony Hernandez in this fight. You let us know down below who you got. Is it Hernandez out of California? Is it Josh Fremd, the transplant to Colorado? Big-time card coming up this weekend. 2 title fights at the top you're not going to want to miss. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.